panel discussion about the Scottish Enlightenment and what it can help us with about perspectives for interdisciplinary research and how this might matter for macroeconomics. Because, of course, as you've seen throughout the conference, we put a large emphasis on interdisciplinarity. In fact, a discussion yesterday with Deirdre, she just pointed out that, as I'm now instructed to call it, orthodox macroeconomics. It's quite fascinating because, you know, they're clearly specialists in macroeconomics. They're pretty good at macroeconomics because they're macroeconomists and they get employed at universities. But what they don't do is then enjoy the gains from trade by exchanging these ideas with other people. That is definitely off. So they're an autarky of macroeconomists, which we know is not the most efficient outcome, bizarrely enough. So interdisciplinarity is a key part of rebuilding macroeconomics. And I hope the discussions so far have showed how psychology, social psychology, biology, and various other disciplines, of course, physicists, can all contribute. So to discuss the Enlightenment, I've got three distinguished panelists who are all experts and what this might mean in terms of interdisciplinarity. We're going to have each of the panelists speak for 10 minutes and then offer it open to the floor for about 25 minutes to have your questions and your thoughts on this issue. So to start us off is, to my right, Chris Berry, who's now Emeritus Professor of Political Theory from the Adam Smith Business School. From Glasgow University. That's safer ground. Serves me right for getting too cute. From Glasgow University. And on my left, who's going to go second, is Robert McMaster, who is Professor of Political Economy at the University of Glasgow and has written a number of articles. The one that attracted me most was with my former teacher, Sheila Dow, which is how I got hold of your name, actually, which was an excellent article, so congratulations for that. And then thirdly, of course, Deirdre, who we all know, who is a deep expert on the Scottish Enlightenment and actually all songs from Edinburgh and Glasgow, so she might play us into song as well. Previously a folk singer, oddly enough. So to start us off, Chris, if I can pass over to you for your 10 minutes first. Do you want to take this?
Yeah. Yes. Well, thank you for turning up. I'm pleased to be here. I'll try not to wave the mic around too much. I was told off if I did this. So I'll try and speak into the microphone. I'm not very good at speaking into microphones, but I will do my best. The Enlightenment. Okay, this is a 10-minute tout de raison. Probably a French term because Enlightenment is European. It has an important aspect in Scotland, the Scottish Enlightenment, and to world historical names like David Hume and Adam Smith, and I'll say a little bit about Smith as we go on. But the Enlightenment is, as the term itself, self-identified, is about light as opposed to dark. And darkness equals ignorance and superstition. The response to dark is light, the response to ignorance is knowledge. The Enlightenment is about knowledge, finding things out. To what end? To the end of Bacon, to make life better, both materially and morally. So it's about improvement, a very strong element in the Scottish dimension to doing this. What is the dominant form that knowledge takes in the 18th century? It is science. And what is the dominant form of science in the 18th century? It's Newtonian. Newton is the hero of Enlightenment science. What did Newton do? Well, his method was efficient, inasmuch what Newton had demonstrated, you explain a lot by a little. No superfluous causes, as Newton put it. More than that, he was proven to be correct. He made predictions. There's a famous dispute with Descartes about the shape of the earth. I now paraphrase, I plagiarize. Basically, Descartes thought the globe was like a lemon. Newton froze like a turnip. Typical of the Enlightenment, let's find out. So an expedition was sent off, led by the mathematician Maupertuis, to Lapland to take measurements. Another expedition went down to the Amazon by La Condamine, and they came back eventually and said, Newton's right. So metaphysics are out, evidence using this as a way to make life better. Get rid of, dispel darkness, superstition, and all that goes with that, witchcraft, torture, and so on, capital punishment, and so on. Newton was a challenge. So the famous passage in the Optics where Newton says, if my method goes into the moral sciences, results will follow. And that was taken up. This was a challenge that was taken up by a lot of Enlightenment scholars. David Hume explicitly also in doing that. So what they tried to do was, in a sense, emulate Newton's achievement for social sciences, or moral sciences, as they would call it. And that, of course, incorporates within it more what we would call economics. What they tended to call political economy, as a term that was developed, first of all, by Montclair at the beginning of the 17th century, but not really developed until you get to the 18th century. Adam Smith gives a good definition of political economy. He says, what's it about? It's about plentiful revenue and subsistence for the people, and sufficient revenue for the state to publish, promote, provide public services. But Smith's not unique in that. The Italian philosopher Pietro Verri says something almost the same. James Stewart's definition is also very similar. So what were they trying to do in this science? Now I should say that all the Enlightenment scholars, to pick up Angus's point, were interdisciplinary. I mean, Adam Smith famously wrote a book of moral sentiments and identified himself at the beginning of Northern Nations, former professor of moral philosophy, University of Glasgow. But he also wrote on language, history, literature, and so on. Quenet, perhaps the dominant or most important French physiocrat, was a doctor. If you look at Quenet's publications, most of them are medical, in fact. Linnaeus in Uppsala, now known for his classification of fauna and flora, himself was an agronomist and an economist. I mean, they covered an array of things. So they were never, in a sense, economists. This would be a word they would know. They were political economists. So how did they try and do this? Well, I'll sweepingly say 2 ways. One was, let's be systematic. Esprit systématique. Not esprit de système, that's metaphysics, that's Leibniz and Spinoza and those guys. This is now being much more, as it were, Newtonian, empirical, evidential. Dealing with a system. Adam Smith starts with a very few principles and elaborates in his typical Smithian way, full of side digressions, views about this, that, and the other, but builds them inductively with historical information, runs all the way through the Wealth of Nations. System is a key word in Enlightenment. I mean, Condillac, who I'll mention in a minute, wrote a whole book called The Treatise on Systems. And his definition of system is Newtonian, a lot by a little. A good system has a few principles, ideally only one principle, for which you can then explain. And the word principles is again, crops up time and time again in the literature. Adam Smith has at least a dozen principles in the Wealth of Nations, without actually itemizing. James Stewart's book, the first book in English with the title Political Economy, is the principles of political economy, as he calls it. So it was to be systematic, not ad hoc. So for many ways, the 17th century writings on the economy were often pamphlets. There were a few exceptions like Braguibert, but most of them were pamphlets, ad hoc things, making a particular case for the East India Company or mercantilist literature of that sort. So that was one way of doing it. Do it systematically, scientifically, in the Newtonian sense of producing a lot into a system that was internally coherent, more or less. The second method was precision, terminological exactitude. Condillac, who was a neglected thinker in many ways in this regard, was a lot on language, and he thought the key to science was having the right language. Algebra was his example of a language bien fait. And he applied this to economics. He wrote his book, Commerce and Government, published the same year as Wealth of Nations. And he tried to develop what we need to do is get our terms right. With our terms right, we'll get clarity, and from clarity, we will be able to do the Baconian task of actually making things better. We know what we're talking about. Cantillon, who's probably the best economist along with Smith in the 18th century, very first sentence starts off 3 definitions: wealth, land, and labour. And developed. Smith, by contrast, actually has 4 definitions of price thrown into the Wealth of Nations. So a very different sort of approach, but precision mattered. And behind this, there is critical arithmetic, studied by Petty, the same way you can have numbers, and numbers will be objective, in the same way that definitionally precise language will enable you to be clear, like 2 plus 2 equals 4, it's clear. So the definition of price is this, will be clear. The Enlightenment was disputatious. This is a world of letters. They translated each other's books, and they disputed with each other. So you haven't got a sort of uniform view here. So critical arithmetic, for example, Smith had no time for. Kane had a running fight with a man called Forbonne. Forbonne thought you can't actually do mathematics for physics for the economy, the rural circle that Kane developed. And Beccaria, now best known for Crime and Punishment, also professor of economics, said actually mathematical exactitude doesn't fit. What we have to deal with is probability. So there was a debate going on in method, a debate going on in substance. What is the relationship between individual freedom and the role of the state? Natural liberty, laissez-faire against cameralist interventionism, and so on. Views about consumption, what is the view? I committed myself in a little book I wrote last year called A Very Short Introduction to Adam Smith, big plug. And I say the most important sentence in the Wealth of Nations is, consumption is the end of production.
Yep, first sentence.
Yeah. That's basically what it's about, your consumption. The people. The Wealth of Nations is actually the betterment of the people that comes actually from that. So there's the dispute going on. Let me finish with 2 enormously stupid comments, because that's my métier. One is, the 2 methods I said, the system version and the precision method. But the first one might actually be macroeconomic, because they're dealing with big issues. Population, wealth, growth, development. The second one, the precision one, leads to Chicago. So basically you've got the 2 roots in the sense of economics can be generated out of the Enlightenment. And that's probably my 10 minutes.
Thank you very much indeed. Chris?
Thank you, that was good.
Oh, you've got... when you're ready.
Thank you very much. I have to say it's an enormous honour to be here, and especially on a panel with 2 very distinguished and
Less.
very, very distinguished. And it's incredibly humbling. Obviously, it's fantastic being in Edinburgh. It's frequently said, certainly in my part of the world, I come from Glasgow, that Edinburgh may have a few nice buildings, but Glasgow has the nice people. And I think Adam Smith really appreciated that. In that, Smith, for me, was writing about people. He was writing about their relationships, and he was writing about their material betterment. And what I want to do with the time I have available is really talk about an aspect of Scottish Enlightenment, more narrowly Smith, in which I'm interested, and I think has quite profound, potentially quite profound implications for economics. Just as a bit of background, I'm very interested in in health economics and the methods of health economics. And my comments are based on this. Nonetheless, I think that they have quite marked and potentially significant implications for how we conduct and conceive of the macroeconomy. Indeed, as a distraction perhaps, I find it quite difficult to separate a reform of macroeconomics from a reform of economics as a whole. There will be particularities nonetheless, but I think we're really talking about a reform of economics as a whole, and for that I'm eternally grateful for Deirdre's work in terms of Max U in particular. I've seen you present many times about that, and I have to join in with Chris in terms of advertising his book. It is superb. It's an excellent wee reader. It fits into your pocket comfortably. But more seriously, for me, the Scottish Enlightenment, and particularly Adam Smith, is really about the social, what we'd now perhaps term the social embeddedness of the individual and the relationships that arise from that. So in terms of this, the social embeddedness of the individual is also historically situated. So history really matters. And for me, given my limited knowledge of macroeconomics, given it's a long time since I've taught it to any great extent, for me, the history matters to Smith is incredibly important, and it's something that I think we miss, especially when we're teaching economics in the current climate, in that we don't really talk very much about the history of economic thought. I recall a conversation in the Adam Smith Business School. Chris spoke incredibly well at the opening of this. The launch of the Adam Smith Business School at the University of Glasgow about 8-9 years ago. I remember a conversation I had with the then head of school that, well, if we're going to call ourselves the Adam Smith Business School, should we really think about teaching something related to Adam Smith? And he was, yes, absolutely, this is great. So in that respect, we relaunched the history of economic thought as an honours option. And I was talking to a new colleague in the break there, and I'm absolutely delighted that we're also at Glasgow, we're also thinking about or launching a course in economic history. This is, again, there was a rich vein of Scottish economic thought, political economic thought in relating to this. But my more particular comments relate to something I think that economists and economics has overlooked that's in Smith, and health economists in particular, as I mentioned earlier, and macroeconomists may well have an interest in this as well. And that is that in the theory of moral sentiments, Smith obviously devotes considerable amount of time and energy to developing his notion of sympathy and the implications of sympathy and the impartial spectator and so forth. But within that, there's an important segment, I believe, on care. I can't recall the book number, but there is a particular book that's devoted to care. Now, for me, Smith spent more column inches, if you want to express it that way, talking about care in all his works than he did about the invisible hand. So if we take it at that sort of prima facie level, I think Smith attached more importance, I will go out on a limb here and be provocative, Smith attached more importance to care and caring than he did to the notion of the invisible hand. And it was indeed, I would venture, very important to the overall well-being of people in a commercial society, which he was discussing in The Wealth of Nations, that people cared and were cared for. And indeed, he talks about individuals being incapable of sociality, and he talks about having nobody to care for them, and being isolated as if they were in a desert. So that for me is critical and pivotal in Smith's analysis of the sociality of human beings. Another interesting episode in Smith's work as I understand it, is his Chinese earthquake parable. In terms of, he paints the two scenarios where one is that an individual in the West can rest easily despite the fact that there's been a devastating earthquake killing millions of people in far-off China. This individual has no personal contact with these people, and despite their common humanity can rest easily at night. Smith sees this as perfectly moral in that there's an absence of contact, and also there is nothing this individual can do about what's happened in China. He contrasts this with another scenario whereby if this individual was to lose his small finger, and that would somehow stop the earthquake in China, this individual would willingly lose the small finger in one of his hands in order to prevent this earthquake. Now, that anticipates much of the discussion that's occurred in feminist literature, feminist economics, and political philosophy about the different types of care and the commonness of humanity. The second scenario about losing the finger, this individual is not personally involved in any way, has no intimate relationships with any of those individuals that could lose their lives in this Chinese earthquake, but nonetheless is prepared to give up and make a sacrifice in order to prevent something. That would be care that. The individual cares that something shouldn't happen or has the ability to prevent something of harm occurring. So care for me is central. And I think Smith expresses this in interesting ways, but underdeveloped ways. In work I've undertaken with, I've got to say he's a lovely guy, he is a lovely guy, an esteemed colleague in the US, John Davis, we've written about how Smith's work has been taken on by Kenneth Boulding's systems approach, and I think that this is where there are potentially lessons for macroeconomics. In terms of Boulding advances his three systems approach, and he talks about his beloved Adam Smith in terms of social provisioning and so forth. And he talks about the integrative approach, the exchange approach, and the threat system. Now, the threat system is obviously the dominant motivation is fear, and Boulding talks about how this has evolved over history with the evolution of the state. The exchange system relates to what Boulding sees as the market economy. And essentially macroeconomics and economics, mainstream economics or orthodox economics, is really confined to the exchange system and ignores the other two systems. The integrative system for Boulding is founded on love. But Boulding, I think, misses a trick here. He talks about love and he seems to overlook care. But nonetheless, much of his arguments resonate with Smith's understanding of care, and indeed in some respects advances it. Now, Boulding's work, I think, is very important in that for Boulding, the exchange system cannot exist, cannot function without the other two systems. The exchange system is predicated upon the integrative system and indeed the threat system. And this is where I think macroeconomics could perhaps reflect further in terms of how those systems interact, what are the implications for the exchange system, the market type economy, and indeed what configuration of institutions, and I think this was one of Smith's concerns, what configuration of institutions would actually enhance our well-being. And I think this is an important factor that's missing from macroeconomics, that perhaps reflection of Smith on institutions and care more particularly may be instructive. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Well, let's see, is it on? Is it on now? Can you turn on the microphone?
Is it on the pack?
It's on the back. See, I don't know how to do it. I'm an electronic idiot. There we go. These two, they're actual experts on these matters. I'm fond of quoting Harry Truman, our president, so unlike our current president, who said, an expert is someone who doesn't want to learn anything new because then he wouldn't be an expert. It's a wise remark. My contribution to this is to emphasize that, as Chris pointed out, the Enlightenment is varied, and the French, or indeed the German or Italian Enlightenment, are in sharp contrast, I think, for important purposes, to the Scottish Enlightenment. And I would claim that the shift in moral sentiments that takes place during the 18th century and afterwards is a shift in ideology in favor of equality and liberalism, and that comes from the Scottish part. Now, you could make a case that Kant, believed in the dignity of the individual. He certainly did. But what follows from Kant is Hegel, and it's not so obvious that would have been productive of the free societies that Hegel claimed he was interested in. And the French Enlightenment, and even the Italian, was tended to state action of various sorts in Germany as well. And my claim would be, here's a very sharp statement. Perhaps it's wrong, but it's a scientific hypothesis. Without the Scottish Enlightenment, the modern world would not have happened. It's as straightforward as that. The Scots invented the modern world. And it's their kind of enlightenment, this enlightenment of equality, and this enlightenment of positive sum, of moving from the dark world of Hobbes and Adam Smith's contemporary, whom he knew, and of course quarreled with because Rousseau quarreled with everyone, to a high ground, a highland indeed of light, of optimism, of positive sun. Someone was saying to me that Edinburgh tends to be the positive sun city, and Glasgow, despite the fact that Adam Smith was a professor there, is the negative sun place. I can't resist quoting the folk song. One Sunday I went walking, and there I saw the Queen, a-playing at the football with the lads on Glasgow Green. The captain of the other side was scoring with great style, so the Queen, she caught a policeman and stuck him in the jail. That's zero sum. And the idea that social cooperation beyond direct, we could call it individual social cooperation if we wanted to. It sounds like an oxymoron, but it's not. The social cooperation that we have in family or friends or in a company, that's individual social cooperation. And I quite agree with Bob's point that Adam Smith was concerned with care and with provisioning for ordinary folk. But of course, he emphasized, as his famous parable of the coat, that the massive social cooperation of exchange, of trade, is a terribly important form of cooperation. So there's individual cooperation and social cooperation. And this whole ideology, I think, made for a non-authoritarian, egalitarian conception of the good society. It comes to a head, so to speak, in John Stuart Mill, to the descendant of Scots at least. No, that's not correct. I don't think he was a descendant of Scots. He was English, for God's sakes. But
his father was Scots.
What?
His father was Scots.
Yeah, that's what I thought. That's what I thought. I thought, okay, there's some Scottish connection there. So that made people bold. This idea that we're equal, a man's a man for all that, says Burns. That idea is tremendously corrosive of hierarchies and corrosive of tyranny. And it's that made us rich, not government activity, as necessary as some of it is. And Smith is eloquent about schooling, for example, elementary schooling. So I'm claiming that a change in moral sentiment, that in Smith, you must read the theory of moral sentiments. I won't embarrass people by asking how many have, but you must. It's a great book. In some ways, it's a superior book to the Wealth of Nations. It's an incredible book. And you put the two together, and the theory of moral sentiments is very much about education. It's about the development of a social personality in a way that's just completely written out of modern economics. So the kind of macroeconomics that most interests me is economic growth. And I'm claiming that economic growth comes from a change in ideology. Not so much in changes in policy, so that you don't misunderstand me, but a change in the attitude of ordinary people about their own abilities. Instead of you being a milkmaid, and that's it, dear, you're a milkmaid, people could reach. They could, as the English say, in their sporting way, they could have a go. And that's what made the modern world.
Thank you very much indeed to all of our speakers. It's quite a testimony to have an American, an Englishman, and a Scotsman, a Glaswegian, a Ouija, all on the panel speaking about dominating by Adam Smith. I would like to just start off the question. So, Deirdre, you mentioned this idea of cooperation, but you suggested it's individualist cooperation. Or you're hinting, I think I kind of know what you mean.
Yeah.
But I'd like to invite the others to think about, given that it was the first sentence in the moral sentiments, that we care about other people, there's something in, however so selfish a man may be, there's something about the position of our neighbour. He didn't just leave that as the first sentence for nothing. It was absolutely fundamental.
It is.
And so, to what extent can we extend that? Is it really just to our adjacent neighbours? And Robert, the famous example of the Chinese, in those days one could be forgiven for thinking about distance, but then we have people far away who I identify with for different reasons. And so, how far can this degree of cooperation or sympathy, I guess Smith would call it, how far do we dare think that it might extend? Yeah.
That opening sentence refers to principles of his nature. as I say, Smith is making a universalistic statement about what he regards as the nature of human beings. It's the nature of human beings to have a disinterested concern for the happiness of others. If it's disinterested and it's universal, then in principle, it's not restricted by locality.
Right.
Do you want to make it your... No. Okay, it's a very simple answer. Who would like to go first with the question?
Well, yeah, on
hang on.
point, Chris,
Oh,
just one sentence.
Please.
And I think if God bless him, Adam Smith were here, he would object to my characterization of the special role of Scotland, because he would hope that all of humankind could exercise this cooperation. But indeed, in the long run, that's what's happened.
Out to the floor for some questions. Yes, Lisa.
Yeah, thank you very much. Fascinating, and I think it ties a lot of the points we've been talking about today. Just to try and link Robert's point on care with Chris's point on precision of language. I suppose the question...
Have you got the microphone close to your mouth?
Sorry, apologies. Just in terms of my own work, in terms of productivity, I think a barrier to that has been the precision of language. So in economics, it's very technically defined, changing GDP over hours worked. Whereas I've been trying to incorporate aspects of well-being and productivity, and that's been quite a struggle. And I think today we're all coming from different disciplines. In productivity, I've in my work referred to it as the productive capacity of an economy. And that's kind of allowing me to look at different from a multidisciplinary perspective and bring in aspects such as care, well-being, feminist economics, economics and institutional aspects of power, etc. So I suppose the question is, how do we strike that balance between precision and a common understanding so that we can operate and function and work together, with not restricting ourselves so we can actually explore with a degree of freedom and a degree of philosophical freedom.
Wow. This resonates with wider issues for me in terms of definitional precision. The social sciences, as I understand it anyway, the social sciences are awash with definitional imprecision, and also silos. We seem to talk past one another, even within the same disciplines. I think we get, I don't know, it'd be interesting to discuss this with you. For me, there is an antagonistic relationship, at least as macroeconomists, or at least as I understand as macroeconomists, configure productivity and issues of care. So in that, if the proportion of our activities is increasingly become related to caring and providing care, does this necessarily impact on our national income statistics and our productivity? Well, prima facie it could well do, but at the same time it might make us a better society. So there is this tension, I feel, and it could be partly that definitional imprecisions, or on the other hand, to be devil's advocate, it could be that this is a reflection not of definition but of values, which is more fundamental, I feel.
Eric.
I've got the microphone, is this okay?
Yes.
Yes, of course it is, yes. Let's see if you have it.
Sorry, but as a Frankfurt School economist, I feel a bit obliged to throw two spanners into that really harmonious sort of presentation of the Enlightenment that we had so far. So one is, when you talk about Newton, as far as I remember, I've read somewhere that he was also into alchemy, and he was also a very strong believer, so he had probably had some ideas that were then not proven. So it's much more diverse, sort of the development of the ideas. The other spanner is sort of what's the relation between, or what we should ask also is the relationship between Enlightenment and colonialism and the Satanic Mill, the industrialization that followed afterwards. So it's maybe not all so sunshiny and apple pie as it seems.
Well, as a former professor of English, I should point out that Blake's poem, nor shall my sword sleep in my hand till we have built Jerusalem, England's green pleasant land, about the Satanic Mills, has nothing to do with industrialization. It's commonly quoted that way, but it's not.
Churches.
It's about mills, about grain mills.
But picking up on the point of colonialism, I think was related to that point.
That's the main point.
Yeah, if I could just, the Newton thing is obviously right, but I mean, this is a caricature of Newton. I mean, Newton's alchemy was not known about.
No.
Hume is very careful because he wants to distinguish Newtonianism, which was an ideology which was of a deistic sort, and what Hume thought was important, which is a scientific method. You get it from that. So, and of course, it's not all right. I mean, these are polemicists. So, by definition, it's not going to be chiaroscuro. It's going to be white and dark, bright and black. The colonialism bit is in a sense, is obviously an important element here. I mean, Smith writes a lot about colonies and Latin Americans, in fact, and is well aware, though he doesn't make a song and dance about this, that Glasgow tobacco trade is part of a triangular system where slavery is connected with it. But he says slavery is evil. It takes more. But what part of the original debates of macroeconomics comes from 17th century debates about East India Company, the Turkey Company, and so on. And it was, in a sense, extracting materials, minerals, spices, and bringing them back. And that's where initially a lot of the work in what we might call macroeconomics came from. But it was all sort of polemical and disputatious and limited. It took the 18th century people to try and make sense of this and to try and see it in the way in which Smithian free trade, of course, would be something that would benefit both sides in principle. But we're not, there is a dark side to this, and people have written books called The Dark Side of Enlightenment and so on. And I wasn't pretending to claim anything different than that. But the colonialism is one that is got increasingly salient in this, because the question of race get involved, and definitions of definitional exactitude about racism. And Linnaeus is doing this all the time. What Linnaeus' system is precisely about is giving definitions for, so if you can find a plant in Borneo, you can give it a name, it'll be understood back in Glasgow. And that's part of, again, the drive for knowledge, as opposed to obscurantism and parochialism.
Do you want to comment, or do you want to? Yeah, Eric, please.
One thing that fascinates me about this period of intellectual history is that people like Smith and Hume weren't just economists, they were philosophers, which Dennis alluded to at the end of the last session about the fact that we were reaching into an area of philosophy, but perhaps more importantly, that they were moral philosophers. And what I'm intrigued to get the panel's thoughts on is they were actually very, very good moral philosophers. And in many ways, it's not even evident that moral philosophy has made a lot of progress. Even in psychology, I'm very interested in Jonathan Haidt's book, which is getting a lot of attention in moral psychology, draws on a Humean notion of, reason being enslaved to passions, which shows how much progress has been made in that discipline. But what I'm intrigued by is I still think economists have stopped studying moral philosophy, but they've kept moralizing. And they do very much moralizing. In fact, what has been really provocative, I'd say, was evident in the last discussion about zero sum, which to me is ultimately just a question of justice. And justice is a very complex area which you can't just test people's or measure zero sum, even though I thought that was brilliant and fascinating. I would say implicit in an awful lot of what economists say about ethics is really, really bad ethics. So you think, for example, the issue of values, what does value mean? I'd love to, specifically in the context of being accurate in words that we'll use it again. I mean, I'm not even sure it has semantic content. But anyway, sorry, it's a bit of a long rant. It's something I feel strongly about, because I think we are absolutely on the edge of ethical questions all the time in economics. And and yet we are third rate or worse than that when it actually comes to our abilities as moral philosophers, and that was not true of his era.
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because I too have a book on this subject. It's called the Bourgeois Virtues, and it's a virtue ethical approach in line with the way I interpret the theory of moral sentiments, of an ethic for a commercial society. And I think you're quite right. The kind of idiot's guide to utilitarianism is about as far as most economists get in thinking about ethics. They have no idea that there might be a certain amount of self-contradiction in utilitarian thinking, or that there's a certain madness about it all. On the other hand, to go back to the earlier point, we non-orthodox economists tend to criticize national income as a measure. But as you point out, Derek, national income is a measure of the tradable capacity of the nation, at least. And that is a good thing. I think it's very much a matter of orders of magnitude. If you're talking about income distribution over the business cycle, or over a short period of years in which one city is up and the other is down, then this gross increase in capacity is not as helpful as it could be. But over a long period, I'm telling you, it's 3,000%. It's Paul's about $1 billion was once about $2 billion out of 5 instead of 1 out of 7. And then the little objections, or as I regard them, to national income is not as persuasive. And the ethic of a kind of crude utilitarianism, you've got more goods, what more do you want there, is workable.
You'd like to, yeah. I'd just like to agree with Deirdre, and I think it's an incredibly important point that you raise, and it doesn't go back to macroeconomics again. It goes back to my point about economics more generally. Inject a bit of personal experience in this. I teach health economics, and I'm absolutely, aspects of it utterly appall me in terms of how human life is configured and treated. Quality adjusted life years is just these are just figures. These are people's lives that we seem to be dealing with, and we seem to be insulating students from the rest of society. And macroeconomics stands accused of that as well. The financial crisis is a very obvious example. That was very much a crisis of ethics as far as I was concerned. So I think this is a very, very deep issue that you raise, and thank you for raising it.
Then Snow, and then you, yeah.
This fascinating discussion reawakened 2 areas of great confusion in my mind.
Hold it closer, dear.
I'd like to ask 2 questions in which I'm confused. One is, do you feel that there's a tension between what you said Smith's focus on care is and the universalism, cosmopolitanism that the Enlightenment philosophers pursued? Because anybody who knows anything about care knows that it can't be universalized. Still spreading it across all of humanity is not as powerful as spreading it in your family. And so, was Smith's sense of sympathy something to do with affect, or was it some other drive from what was the Enlightenment's understanding of affect? And how is there a tension between that and Smith's impartial observer? That's one area of confusion for me. And the second area was, this is a question to Deirdre, you just said that economic growth is mainly the product of ideology, and in your bourgeois virtues, it's mainly the product of bourgeois virtues. My question is, where does the ideology and the virtues come from? Why was it that it came from here rather than, and why now, not another time?
I can answer briefly both questions, but the last, I say you evidently haven't read volume 3 of my trilogy, which gives a full account of where it all comes from. I think you're misunderstanding moral, what's the phrase? Moral, not moral sympathy, that's not what it's called.
Empathy.
Yeah, no, not empathy so much. Anyway, Hume says that our ethical convictions do not come from our reason. They come from our, you could say, emotions. And in the moral sentiments are the operative phrase. And it's not das Adam Smith problem. That's a false dichotomy. It's nonsense that the Smith of the theory of moral sentiments was all about love, and the Smith of the wealth of nations is all about, I don't know, hatred. And that's wrong. It's simply that the source of virtue is not logic, it's feeling. And that's the key, in a way, that's the key optimistic contribution of the Scottish Enlightenment. It's to say, people are self-interested, I admit that, but they also have, as you were quoting the first sentence of the theory of moral sentiment, however self-interested they are, they have an interest in others. And they just have it. It's not because some theorem has told them that they should have it. And I completely agree with whoever it said. I think you said it, Robert, that we grotesquely overemphasize the invisible hand assertion in Smith. Smith used the phrase once in The Wealth of Nations, and once in the Theory of Moral Sentiments, and once in an unpublished item. But anyway, in two different senses. So, it's not a central idea.
Just a quick comment on the confusions. It would take too long to give you a proper answer. Sympathy is my imagination.
Yeah.
It's not about affect as
Exactly.
such.
Yeah.
You imagine yourself in the
That's
position
right.
of another person.
That's exactly.
And then it's a question about your response to that. That's why you can make a judgment.
Yeah.
The book is called Moral Sentiments because, as Deirdre has said, it's not about God-given commandments and not about
Right.
rational deduction. It's about feeling. You feel angry.
Yeah.
You feel pity. You feel generous. That's the stuff of morality, which is back to the point about what are we talking about when we're talking about. Sorry?
It may still be cognitive. I wouldn't compare it to rationality so quickly. It may still be cognitive. So anger can actually have a structure, a rational structure.
You do, but the point is, it's in a sense, it's not a rational deduction.
No, it's not.
It's not a Kantian imperative that's at stake here. It's the fact it's an unreflective response. And these are what you can call natural virtues. And Smith doesn't use that language, but it takes on. Now, the cur, in a sense, is slightly misleading. Part of the language is benevolence. Now, there can't be universal benevolence in a practical sense, and Smith says that's not possible. You care for individuals. And that is going to be, in a sense, reflective of the community in which you live. Now, there's a big debate about the impartial spectator. In one sense, the impartial spectator is an internalisation of your particular judgments of your society. The debate is the extent to which that can be called circles of sympathy. How far do they ripple out? I'm of the view that what makes the 18th century work is they have a very substantive theory of human nature. This is a constant. Human beings all feel angry. They all feel pity when they see children suffering. This is something on which you can then base a universal ethic. And that's where you can get a universal ethic going. And it's not down to the postmodernist attempt at everything being sort of a local construction.
That's right.
But otherwise, it takes too long to put the impartial spectator. But there is a solution if you believe it.
Do you want to say that? Are you okay? Oh, no, that's final question over here.
Thank you.
No, you turned it off there.
It is.
Yeah, it's not on.
Do you want this one?
You know, this is the oldest electronic technology we have. It's the oldest. And a third of the time it fails.
Just shout.
I wish the engineers would get it straight.
Right, now I've got your attention.
There you go.
Policy relevance, that was the question we started with. And of course, it's very tempting when we stray into philosophy to lose all sight of policy relevance. Let me try and bring it back, and I think circumstances actually make it more relevant as we currently address them. So Jonathan Israel in the Enlightenment is very good on warning, if not being wary about nationalist agendas on the Enlightenment.
Yeah, it is.
I speak as a Jurchter. I'm as wary as the Sassenachs of Edinburgh, claiming that they've got a monopoly on the Enlightenment as anybody. So the point I just wanted to raise, for example, there were some throwaway remarks about Spinoza and Leibniz. Let's just be clear. Spinoza was very good at grinding away at his lenses, writing some pretty obscure stuff, because he didn't want to end up like the DeWitt brothers. If you speak out too plainly, you get gutted and the masses eat your entrails. It's not a bad picture, even in a rational place like Holland. So we've got to be clear about where nationalism can take us. Leibniz's notation was precise. It took an Englishman, Babbage, to say, enough with the mathiness of Newton, let's get some clear notation so that we can build this difference machine. The heritage then is contradictory as well. We've got the Franciscan scrap between John Duns Scotus and between George Buchanan, which all leads up to, for me at least, this point about where we are now with a situation, as Paul Collier rightly pointed out, with the rent-seeking that has gone on through the financialisation in the city, 40% of GDP now being sunk in London, and creating things that David Skelton in a colony, a Scots colony in Northumbria, which is dear to Angus obviously, of Concert, with the only fine pipe band in Northumbria. Concert now being the venue for the little platoon of Little Englanders who are doing themselves so much self-harm. My question, policy relevant question is, what are you taking from Adam Smith that's relevant to this? How are you actually carrying that genealogy through and spotting how you contribute to the decisions of today? And if we think this is irrelevant, just think about George Buchanan's relevance to the claim of rights in 1689, because that's the situation we're in. A lot of this stuff is melting down very fast, and we need to get very more precise in what we say and how we intervene.
Oh,
I'm going to ask each one of you to take a turn to answer this.
Certainly, my own reaction, my own, what I draw from Smith is the inspiration that ethics and the economy are intertwined, and to use the sociological expression, the economy is embedded in moral sentiments. And the moral sentiments, yes, there's this claim in the Scottish Enlightenment especially or in Kant too, I guess, of universality. But certainly Smith would think that they're amenable to teaching and ideological change. Surely one of his main points of the Wealth of Nations is to battle against a statist ideology with respect to colonies, with respect to tariffs at home. Of course, he ended up enforcing them himself, as his father had. That in the long run, and of course it's not just Smith, it's a bunch of other people, did educate people to a free society. From the 1870s on, this recessed, I'm afraid. And so my task is to revive Smith.
I'm somewhat of a contrarian. I very much doubt there is much policy relevance. I think we have to think for ourselves, and too often it's a sort of prop, rhetorical prop, by citing some great figure in the past on which you could then hang your own prestige. You can be very cynical, but I'm an age now where cynicism is my second nature. But do we go? So, I mean, I did write something once where if you wanted to find something at all, it's anti-groupthink. Because you're talking about the 2008 that was mentioned. In one sense, when you had a groupthink thing. And one thing that's Smith's concept of the mirror, society is a mirror, if it doesn't reflect back a wider environment, so the pin makers become stupid if all they're doing is sharpening pins all day. If bankers, all they're doing is swapping default mechanisms all the time, and the Fitch is doing the same thing, then you've got no sense. You'll become superstitious. The quants, the quant folk basically bewilder people. And what Smith would say is, but the only sentence in that Wealth of Nations that's unqualified is, science is the great antidote to superstition. Now, I think if you wanted to be relevance is, let's be scientific about it, let's be experts about it.
I'll be very brief. I think we both couldn't agree more with Chris. For me, it's about not so much the specific policies per se, it's the framing of policy, it's the discourse in which policy takes place. So Chris was talking obviously about being scientifically informed. I also think the values, so Chris previously alluded to the importance of benevolence and beneficence and care. I would say that perhaps the values of a caring economy might have engendered and encouraged a very different outlook from the financial crisis and financialisation that takes place.